The death penalty is a very controversial topic in our world today. Many politicians base their platforms when they're running for office on whether they are for or against it. Some people have very strong opinions, and usually those opinions arise from personal circumstances. I never used to have that strong of an opinion. However, it personally affected me in my life, so now I do. I want to talk to you a little bit about how we got to where we are in the United States with the death penalty, its history. I would also like to tell you my personal story, how I got to believe in the certain position that I have. Finally, I want to go over some criminal conviction statistics to show you my stance on the death penalty and why. Let me now give you a brief history overview of the death penalty in the United States. The death penalty was brought here by the settlers and was based mainly on British laws. However, as we grew as a nation, the U.S. started to change those laws based on our newly formed country. In fact, in 1775, all 13 of the U.S. colonies had some sort of capital punishment penalty in place. The first U.S. Congress established the federal death penalty in April of 1790. The first person to be executed under that law occurred just a couple of months later in June of 1790. This person was Thomas Bird. He was tried and found guilty of murder on the high seas and was executed by hanging. In fact, prior to the late 1800s, hangings were the main form of capital punishment. That is, until the time period of 1890 to 1903. During those years, Thomas Edison started holding demonstrations to show the power of electricity by electrocuting animals. This made many feel as though this form of death may be quicker and less painful than hangings. This is when the idea of the electric chair was introduced. However, as new execution styles were being introduced, many were already starting the fight to abolish the death penalty in the United States. The first abolishment movement started in 1845. Michigan was the first state to follow suit by abolishing the death penalty in 1846 for all cases except for treason. The next state was Rhode Island in 1852. They abolished the death penalty in all cases, including treason. The search was now on to find ways to carry out this form of punishment in other ways to reduce the cruel and unusual aspect. In 1924, the gas chamber was now an option. The abolishment movement quieted down for a time, my guess in large part due to the preoccupation in this country to World War II. It was brought to light again in 1951 with a famous execution case regarding the Rosenbergs. This was a famous husband and wife duo who was convicted of and executed for treason and espionage to the United States. They supposedly stole highly confidential information and gave it to the KGB. The abolishment movement won a huge victory in 1972 when the U.S. Supreme Court found the death penalty to be unconstitutional, and over 600 death penalty cases were overturned. The win, however, was short-lived when they reaffirmed the constitutionality of the death penalty in 1976. Little adjustments have been made here and there in all the different states to capital punishment laws, but the next big thing to hit the news was the lethal injection in 1982. The abolishment movement wasn't done yet, however. In 1987, a study was released where it stated it could confirm 350 instances in which defendants were wrongly executed for crimes in which they did not commit. In 1993, that marked a time in which the very first prisoner to be on death row would be exonerated using a new science called DNA. The death penalty debate was definitely starting to heighten. In 1996, the last execution by hanging occurred, followed by the last gas chamber execution in 1999. Now here we are, the 21st century. A lot has happened in just the last 15 years with regards to capital punishment. During this time, the following states have put a stop to the death penalty: Illinois, New York, New Mexico, Connecticut, Maryland, Washington State, and countless others. Even the United Nations voted in 2007 to put a moratorium against the death penalty. Still, Executions in many of our states continue, the highest which of these ranked is Texas. So with all of these different positions and the ins and outs of all these different laws, what are we supposed to think of as citizens of the United States? We all want justice for our victims, but where do we draw that line? I think sometimes it takes a personal connection to crime to have an opinion. I have one. In 1998, I was 17 years old. It was a hot July day and I was going to school to report for a band practice. I was then greeted with the unfortunate news that a friend of mine, a year my senior, named Shen Pullman, was murdered. Shen Pullman was a prom queen, a tennis star, and a friend. She was the popular girl that everybody loved, that didn't have a mean bone in her body. She was a year older than I, and I grew up playing softball with her. She was about to leave for college when she was at a local pool with her friends. A gentleman approached them and asked if any of them would be interested in a last-minute babysitting job for his nephew. This man was later identified as John Miller IV. Most of the girls were wary of the situation and didn't want to take the job. However, Shen, being as innocent as she was, and that being her downfall, wanted to take the job as a last-minute way to make money before she left for college. She was getting ready to leave in 2 weeks for Florida State University on an academic and athletic scholarship to study marine biology. She made jokes with her friends, "If you don't hear from me, call the police." But little did she know how much foresight she had. She appeared at his apartment, ready to babysit, with no kids in sight. He lured her there with the sole intention of sexually assaulting her and then murdering her by strangulation. She was 17 years old. He was originally sentenced to death. However, this was in the state of Maryland, where there is now a moratorium on the death penalty, and it was abolished. His sentence was then commuted to a life sentence without the possibility of parole. I was angry. I was hurt. I was sad. I was confused. I always had faith in the justice system, and I started to think I had been naive. Eye for an eye, right? I was always a huge believer in the death penalty. This girl, Shen, leaving just shortly for college, a lifetime in her future. Our sheltered world was shattered by something that we never thought could happen, that we only saw on TV, and then it did. This man was not getting his just reward, and I lost faith in the system. But as time passed, as time does, my friend Shen and the case fell to the wayside. I got married and had kids, and then DNA became a huge part of the news. They were not only making sure criminals were getting punished for their crimes, but it was also being used to prove those innocent that were wrongly convicted. The Innocence Project is an organization that I feel everyone needs to know about. They have some full-time staff attorneys. However, they also use law students to aid prisoners to get DNA tested completed in order to hopefully exonerate them from their crimes. To date, 321 people have been proven innocent. 20 of those were on death row. Another 16 of those were charged with crimes that could have carried a death penalty sentence, however did not receive such. When I first learned of this group, I started to do some research. I found the numbers to be staggering. If so many people were being proven innocent, how many guiltless people were being put to death or dying in prison? I started to change my thinking. I still thought and knew in my heart that John Miller IV was guilty, and he killed my friend Shen. And I still believe that he should die for his crime. But then I thought, is it worth to have this one criminal killed at the expense of one innocent? Does that make me any better? Is that really justice? Here are some numbers that the Innocence Project has released on their website. 31 of the exonerees pled guilty of the crime for which they were being accused. False confessions and incriminating statements attributed to 27% of the exonerated cases. Eyewitness misidentification played a role in 72% of the exonerated cases. Informants contributed to 18%, and invalidated or improper forensic testing attributed to 49% of the exonerated cases. What bothers me about the numbers and what really made me think, this was just the cases that which we have DNA for. This is just a small percentage of cases that are reevaluated. How many people are on death row that don't even have this evidence to fall back on? Between history, current times, and my own personal experiences, I've actually grown to be against the death penalty. If there is one innocent person on death row, that is one too many. That isn't justice served either. You see, if we do lock an innocent person in jail, and they are serving life, we can always release them, and hopefully correct the wrong if they are found innocent. But if you mistakenly put someone to death, there's no coming back from that. No corrections that can ever be made to make things right. I do think justice needs to be served. But until we have a 100% perfect system in place, making sure not one guilty person goes free and not one innocent person is locked away, I have a hard time putting anybody to death. There may be a few airtight circumstances and cases, but that's usually not the common situation. I think we can all agree that we in general have a pretty good justice system in place, but it isn't perfect, and it never will be. It's run by people. People have emotions that affect their decisions, regardless of rules or regulations that tell us to not listen to them. People have vendettas, and some people are morally bankrupt. We can't judge who they are any better than we can judge the criminals.